Hello and welcome to episode 51 of the world's first Paul Weller fan podcast. I'm Dan Jennings, and 10 years ago I gave up my live streaming career as a radio presenter with one big regret: never getting to interview my hero, the legendary British musician Paul Weller. This podcast exists purely to solve that issue. Welcome to Desperately Seeking Paul. My guest this week is another true delight, a creator of soundscapes, visionary sounds, and guitar magic like very few people on this planet. Aziz Ibrahim tells stories of meeting with Paul, forming a magical bond with him, Steve's White and Cradock, Mick Talbot, and tales of creating fabulous music together for Paul's albums, including Sonic Kicks and Illumination, along with work from the two of them that you're likely to have never heard before. This is another cracker of a conversation, so let's get into it. Aziz Ibrahim, thanks for joining me.
My pleasure, man. Thanks for inviting me, Dan.
People listening to the podcast won't be able to see this, but I can see you, and the room you're in is clearly a big deal. The amount of guitars in this room that you're in. Where are you?
I'm just in a loft in my house in Longsight in Manchester, in the council estate I was born on. I'm still here. Yeah.
You get sent to the top of the house to do your guitaring.
Well, it was actually a move, so I needed to shift. So I thought the only space where I'd get a little bit of peace, and it's not really that peaceful and quiet because there's a skylight just there, and outside all the neighbours are out screaming and shouting in their gardens, and there's chickens going off. And I live in the heart of Longsight Anson Estate, and it's such a mixed bag community-wise, multicultural. I mean, it's so lively here, but sometimes you just want to get some sleep at like 3-4 a.m. and not listen to two women screaming and fighting over some guy they've both been seeing.
I'm really excited about getting into this stuff with you. I want to kick off, first of all, when you discovered the music of Paul Weller.
I mean, like everybody, I think I just grew up with it, as in you knew the jam tunes. I really didn't know earlier than that because it was kind of it was a southern thing for me. And being a northerner, there was the bands that I was exposed to up here. So obviously, that relationship with, not that I'm that old, but, Lonnie Donegan being kind of the roots of kind of the music scene in Manchester and that kind of coffee shop era. I grew up with that kind of era because I came into music through rockabilly, really. But later on, as the punk scene hit, really, I think from exposure through like the Buzzcocks and so forth, and all the Manchester connections, all Liverpool connections, it was that was the first taste of. But as it developed and the songs were kind of, I don't know. I mean, people have got different tastes, but I thought the songs started to get they were refined. I thought he was really growing as a songwriter. I just grew with that. I thought the band was maturing and was creating. Some bands go kind of off track, but I think with the Jam, they really were on track, as in we're just getting better and better, and all the tunes were just like, oh, this is just killer. So when he got into that kind of new wave period, it was just firing, just kicking. I mean, musicians, we are motivated by bands and artists during our growth, inspired by them, and I was inspired by that, but I wasn't like a hardcore fan because my aim was to learn to play the guitar and to learn and just to keep growing as a musician, and then go from playing the guitar to being a band member, and then from a band member to being a songwriter. That's what I really loved about it, why I listened to it, because I was like, wow, how is he singing and playing and also jumping around and putting so much energy? I mean, that energy was really what got me, and to this day, I have never seen a more powerful and energetic individual, let alone the band. I mean, I can't talk about every member, but I can talk about Paul because obviously after working with him and developing a friendship, I have never seen a more powerful and energetic individual. How I can prove that? Quite simply, that if you've ever seen Mr. Weller perform with an acoustic guitar, he doesn't need a band, does he? He just needs a decent song, and off he goes, and that voice and his whole attitude and persona projects everything that I'm saying.
Matt Dayton was talking about the fact that rehearsals are full on. It's like a gig, and that energy. And I don't know, I mean, it's remarkable. Paul's nearly 20 years older than me. I'm 46. Oh God. And I've got two young kids, 6 and 4. And I'll be honest, I'm knackered.
absolutely knackered. He's got young kids, twins and a young girl, but still like continually like moving forward, doing new stuff. It's incredible.
Well, I mean, I heard recently that he's not going to make any more albums or something. I don't know if that's true or not. I mean, that could just mean that his approach will be different, that he's going to make singles or he's going to make a series of, or it's content that he's, I mean, let's call it what it is. Yeah, content creation. So, I mean, I'm the same way. That's why there's a ton of guitars here, not just here. These are my working ones. And then I've got 50 guitars in total because of the kind of, I keep them like in the cases or storage or whatever, depending on what they are and how often they get used. But I'm full on right now. I'm 15 or something, and I'm just really keen to learn and on Zoom with, as I am with all my gear. And I kind of embraced digital. I haven't got time to moan about it, I think, and I think he's like that. He hasn't got time to moan about it. He just gets on with it and he finds his different inspirations. I mean, when I've spoken with him about bands, I might have moaned and groaned about certain bands, but he was always positive about new up and coming bands, as you can tell by his support roster as well. He is always supportive of young, because I think he sees himself as he was in a young band. I mean, let me tell you, in all honesty, I have never met or worked with an artist like him. And I've had the privilege of working, being in the Stone Roses. Call it what it is, as an observer, a sober observer from the inside looking out, experiencing what they experience. That, they gave me that privilege of the ride of saying, hey, you're in our band. Come and see what we see, what we've created. It wasn't my creation. It was their creation. And I tagged along and I rode that because they invited me. Even after that, meeting Paul, I met Paul through Steve White, and because I was in that band, The Players. I don't know if you know The Players.
Yeah, with Mick Talbot as well, right?
It was Mick Talbot, it was Steve White, it was Damon Minchella, and myself. To me, it was like incredible. Each musician there, I mean, obviously they knew each other, and I was the northerner, so I was the northern monkey, and then they were all the southerners together. And I met Paul through Steve White. I think we were just at Paul Smith's trying to get freebies.
Yeah, you were in Covent Garden, wasn't it? Yeah.
That's right. Yeah. So I was there with Ian Brown and a few
trying to get freebies.
Well, that's what it is. I mean, call it what it is. We're there. What? Because, hey, we're big fans. Hey, Paul, we're big fans. No. Can we have any free clothes, mate? So I can go spend my money on... Well, for me, it was guitars and pedals and amps and things. That's what I saved my money for. And maybe a date,
If you're lucky, yeah.
Yeah, if you're lucky. For others, I can't speak for. It was 98, I think it was. And when we walked in Paul Smith's in Covent Garden, and Steve walked in with him, and I knew Steve. And then Paul said to me, he said, when he saw me, it was him that said, all right, I see, it's nice to meet you. And then I said, you wrote Fucking My Star, didn't you? And I went, well, I wrote the music, yeah. And then he goes, yeah, fucking brilliant, that tune. Fucking brilliant. And that's how our relationship started. Just based on him listening to music. Obviously, he was interested in what Ian Brown's output was going to be after the demise of the Roses. And this was the first single. I mean, Melody Maker and NME hid most of my kind of contribution. I've still got the magazines because they angered me, and I kept that as like a fuel to motivate me to work harder. But they used to write things like, oh, Ian played everything and he did this all by himself. And I was like, I brought him back to playing the bass, the drums, the guitars, writing the music at home in this very house and, in this little box room. And that's how the press treat you. Yeah, but I mean, I was new to the game. I got my baptism of fire in the Roses. Before that, I never had in Simply Red. I never had that kind of, because I was in the background and it was kind of, it was all about Mick and it was me. He's a me kind of guy. And but with this, it was different. That backlash, well, I don't want to call it a backlash, but it was that, I don't know what to call it, animosity, hatred, or just plagiarism of the way one magazine does it and they all followed suit. But when we met, it was just that. It was this guy has all this credibility, has all this history, talent, and then he's been listening, obviously, in his progress. He's picked up on the details and he's clocked the truth. And he said to me, X. And that was the beginning of our relationship. And I always say this, you ask anybody, whenever they ask me about Paul, I always say, the nicest guy, most intelligent, most musical person I have ever met, and a friend, a real friend, somebody that you can trust, that has your back, and that stands up for you. I mean, let's get things straight. My relationship with Paul is this way, that I'm not his musician. I'm not his band, right? He knew that that relationship was different. And he made a conscious decision because one day he let it slip when he was the guy that used to get drunk and I didn't. So I remember everything.
Oh, this is going to be good.
I mean, I can't remember if it was Jacob's or whether it was studio or whether it was at his place, a Black Barn. This is a Black Barn. I can't remember if it was there or earlier. And he was kind of like contemplating whether I was going to play with him or not. I could hear him kind of going, no, it's not going because, we want to keep it a friendship. We want to keep this a prolific kind of, writing and, keep our relationship what it is, friendship and music, and not employer-employee, which can change the dynamic completely. And I respect that. And I'm thankful that that's how we've kept it, because it's kept the friendship where it should be. You'd have to ask Chopper, about friendships and working with somebody, because obviously he's with his own band, so Ocean Colour Scene, and Steve Cradock, sorry to those that don't know his nickname. That relationship started and stayed maintained all the way to today. And I mean that most sincerely, folks. I just kind of have this utmost respect for him ever since that day in Paul Smith's right till now. And I was just saying that we did a show at the Roundhouse in Camden. I don't know if you remember this, but it was the Jim Capaldi tribute.
Let's come back to that, because I have to, first of all, I need to understand. So when did you start working together? So when did it cross that boundary of collaborating? Because there was the Middle Road EP, which you worked on, which was you leading. And then there was this, where is it? He's the Keeper. The CD single where you were on the B-side, Heliocentric, right?
Heliocentric, okay. Let's call it Heliocentric. And but that was a release through the newspaper. I think it was a free.
Was it? So was it not an actual buy in a shop release?
I don't think so. I think it came as a free release through, I can't remember, one of the tabloids.
Right. It's this nuts kind of insane instrumental mashup thing.
Absolutely, yeah. And that's where we kind of had common ground. He saw my band, which if anybody knows my band, it's like the White Stripes from Bombay, basically. Okay. It's like it's a duo of two, an Indian and a Pakistani, British Indian, a tour de force of like Indian tabla and Pakistani guitar, or I like to call it Yorkshire and Lancashire, because I'm Mancunian and he's a Leeds boy but lives in Birmingham. So he heard this tabla guitar outfit that I'd put together. Actually, I mean, it starts earlier than that, but it was later on that my band develops from this super group that I had, which was with Mike Joyce and Andy Rourke from the Smiths. So a lot of people don't know it because the album never got released, but the EP did, which is Middle Road. So that band, that super group, was what Paul saw and invited us to tour with him as support on. He kind of saw, it was, as it developed into this band, he went, you guys remind me, and this is how deep his knowledge of music is. He says, you guys remind me of Coltrane, John Coltrane. And he says, Interstellar, the last album, Interstellar. And if anybody knows that album, Interstellar, it is absolute nuts. It's his last album before he died. God bless him. It's absolutely like chaos, jazz chaos, next level jazz chaos is the best way to describe it. And he kind of saw that in me. I'm pretty sure of it. And when we came together to write, obviously his influences. Everybody knows, he wears them on his sleeve, the Beatles or whatever it is. It's there. So there's that certain period of the Beatles, I think, that he loves, but creating his own kind of madness. I think he loves that. I mean, if I can speak for him on that, but this is where, I don't like speaking on other people's behalf, but that's the impression that I got. And I think he knew that I'm a kind of a soundscape kind of guy, a sonic guy. Sometimes I don't like calling myself a musician. I like calling myself a soundsmith or an audio creator. I don't see music always as notes and as conventional. It can be atonal. It can be just attitude. It could be, Andy Warhol or something, in music. And I'm so glad that he's that way too. There's an Indian instrument called the sarod, and it has 25 strings. Okay. It looks like a banjo with a massive sitar neck on it with a metal neck, and it has 4 melody strings, 4 drones. He has 2 chidgaris, which are like the 5-string banjo, extra strings. And then he has 15 sympathetics. I hope that adds up to 25.
I'm going to check. How many? Hold on, but you still have the same amount of fingers, right?
But you still only have these fingers, and they don't respond to the brain as you want them to. I played this instrument for him, and he was like, he already had an album. He sent me an album saying that this sarod player that he was into. And he sent me this vinyl in a sleeve, and he says, check this guy out. And so his knowledge was vast. It was diverse. That's what I loved about him. You know, I love about him. It's just diverse knowledge of music. And he sent me this thing, and we got it onto the recordings as well and into various tracks. But that track as well, yeah, definitely. So that kind of being able to explore soundscapes and things and creating madness and things, that was one of the foundations of the musical relationship.
And was that recorded at Chris Difford's studio? Because the album Heliocentric doesn't have an S in it, and it's named after his studio. Your track, Heliocentric, has an S in it, which is named after the mixing desk at Heliocentric, really. But yeah, where did you do it? Did you do your bits and send it on to him, or did you meet up and do it together?
No. It was in the studio. I'm trying to remember the studio. I mean, it was a posh knob studio in London. It wasn't a new studio. It was one of the old established places. So I'd also worked with him at Noel's studio, Noel Gallagher's place, when he had, where he had either, put all his equipment and rented or whatever, somewhere in like a southern countryside. It's all one thing to me.
Just go where you need. So yeah, the song he was talking about, so Illumination was the 2002 was the album where, weren't you learning that? What's that instrument called?
Sarod.
And weren't you learning it at the time though?
I'm learning it now. As we speak, I'm learning. Everything I do is self-taught. So it was one of those things where that punk attitude towards, what the guitar is, for me, it was a rebellious symbol, an instrument that I could rebel against culture, religion, peer pressure, every single pressure that I'm under. And also, when I took that instrument on, it's an Indian classical instrument, well revered, well respected, played by absolute masters. So I'm like that, the Sex Pistols of the sarod. No idea. Learned my information from friends, and then later on off YouTube when it appeared. But generally just through research and a thirst for wanting to find out for myself, self-achievement kind of thing. That's all I want, is just that satisfaction that I taught myself and created a tune on it, can play a tune on it. That's it. Not that I fall into the categories of how it should be played, or, even to sit on a seat and play it is blasphemy. It's played sitting down with a certain leg position. Just like the sitar. But hey, I'm a Manc. I'm a Northern council estate working class boy. I just kind of approached it as in, got no money, nobody's around. I just have to do whatever I have to do. And I found a piece of paper. I can't remember where I got this. I printed it out from somewhere, and how to tune it kind of thing. I found out what the tunings were for the strings. But he really took to it. Because I think he knew the instrument, and I think lots of other people didn't know it. And it just resonated well, no pun intended, but it resonated with him. Yeah,
there's 2 tracks on the Illumination album, Spring at Last, which is this instrumental, and then All Good Books. And I don't know, again, if this was recorded as a band in the studio or separate, but has Carleen Anderson and Jocelyn Brown, plus Damon Minchella on that one as well. I mean, like a lovely song. I was listening to it directly before we spoke. I was listening to that one. I really like that tune.
One of the things Paul and I discussed a lot was religion. Believe it or not. And obviously me being a Muslim or trying to practice Muslim, which is very hard in the rock and roll industry. when you got one woman sat on one lap and another on the other lap, and they're trying to force champagne down your throat, it's hard. Excuse the expression, but it's very difficult. I've got through it. And with him, I think it was just, I don't know whether it's the intrigue, but we did have these discussions a lot about religion and so forth. And I'm not quite sure of his heritage in terms of, or conditioning in terms of Christianity or whatever, but me being a Muslim was constant discussion, as you can see by the tracks later on, you know, I mean, my vocals on God, but we will come to that later, I suppose. Yeah. Yeah, we always had that. And lyrically, you can see it in his lyrics that he is often approaching that subject. And I seem to be one of those people that maybe triggered some of his thought patterns or thoughts about it, and kind of lyrics that appeared. But Illumination was more kind of playing guitar on tracks or playing sarod or whatever, you know, on his songs or songs that he was writing or collaborating with. I've got to admit that even through the whole process, I still have that problem of being treated as an equal, that Paul is the only person that I found who treats me as an equal. I mean, so does Chopper and so does Whitey, and I'm not talking about that, but I'm talking about when music is presented to the world, you're guaranteed that they're going to put Kelly's name on there or Noel's name on there or whoever's name on there. And to me, being a person of color and a person of different culture, I mean, my culture is music, you know, that's my first culture. But all this other stuff, it's there, you know, we could talk about racism in music for day in, day out and year on. It is still there. And every time I would play, it was still an issue with me about, you know, recognition or equality, really. You know, people think, oh, you just want fame or something. You just want it. But it's not. It's about equality. It's like Black Lives Matter. You know, it's about being recognized and just being recognized as an equal, just as the same, not as something, a lesser being. And I always had that problem, or it's not a problem, but I always had that issue, you know, when recording and playing. And even on those recordings and playings, I felt that once it been released and then you saw the press that came out and you go, is it because I is Welsh? You know, it was my favourite saying. I've always said that. Even when I've had visas refused in the middle of a tour and everybody else in the band who's white has got their visa and I'm the only one, I always used to say at the consulate, you know, is it because I is Welsh in that? Just cute.
But that must, that must be there's something you said there where I think it seems to me that Paul is always somebody who talks a lot in the press about the contributors to an album, whether that's picked up on or not is often the kind of, I guess,
always supports, right? Always there. Yeah. I mean, I don't know if you want to get into that Camden story right now, but it's relevant on all these subjects.
Because it's interesting, because as is now, there's like a little note that is kind of dedicated to Jim Capaldi. And he says one of the greatest drummers ever. Obviously, he was a legendary member of Traffic, regularly played with Clapton and George Harrison. And so you did the tribute concert with Paul. So how did that come about?
It came through an invite. He rang me up and said, do you want to come and play guitar with me? I think it was just because he wanted to do something different. I mean, he's got an unbelievable, fabulous musician in Steve Cradock with him. It's like, you know, it's like your mum's the best cook in the world, but you still like to go out to eat in takeaways, don't you? So maybe that's the equivalent, that he rang me up and said, would you like to come and do this thing? But also because I knew Jim Capaldi. Right. It wasn't because it was just out of the blue. I knew Jim because originally my band, which was like a Living Colour from Manchester in the 80s, we nearly signed to Island Records and were sat at the boardroom with Chris Blackwell. And we'd been brought into the meeting to Ireland through Jim Capaldi. Jim Capaldi used to come up to a recording studio in Manchester. Andy, who ran the studio, Revolution. Yeah, it's called Revolution Studios, and Andy. And the people that frequented there were people like Clapton and Pete Townsend and the likes of, and it was connected. Now, Andy really believed in us, and we were called Gina after a certain person's girlfriend. It was a singer's girlfriend, God bless him, he passed away. So Jim Capaldi had brought us down to Island Records. So I developed a relationship with them, and he was a believer in the band because we didn't have any money. It was purely a case of he saw this black rock funk group from Manchester in the 80s. Vivid by Living Colour hadn't been released yet. So I knew him, and I think Paul knew that. So I think when he invited me, it was kind of, I knew him, he knew him. So along I went to Camden Roundhouse. He told me the songs he wanted to play that he was going to sing, and that's what he wanted to play. So I did play the electric sitar on one song, choral sitar, the Jerry Jones model. And then for those music heads here listening maybe. There's a Jerry Jones electric sitar I played for one song, and then the other song I played electric guitar. But it was through his invitation. Now, let me tell you, I was treated like shit. It was one of those things. The whole reason why I wanted to be in a band was that it was just a sea of session musicians backing great stars from, you know, John Lord was stood on my left-hand side, you know, Bill Wyman was over there, and, you know, all these people are sucking up, and you got a musical director, and they're trying to push me around because it's a kind of a who are you, which is what happens normally. People look, I'm a kind of a anonymous really, even like to listeners, you kind of go, who's Aziz Ibrahim? And maybe you catch a glimpse here and there. But and the way that the press is, the media, yes, I'm always played down and I'm always kind of the name that's left off. So that's how it is. So here I am in this kind of royal fraternity of music. Obviously, Paul's a lead guy here. He's singing lead vocals on these songs and playing guitar. Whitey's playing drums on the same tracks. And me personally, I've got this struggle on stage because I've got a musical director trying to turn me down or move my amp around, or the band is like, you know, playing over me, and I'm like muscling, trying to get into these songs and play my part. It came to a point where it was like this MD is like, touch my amps. And I said, you touch that amp one more time, mate, and that fucking amp is going down your throat. And that's where it ended up.
That must be so bloody frustrating, though.
It was frustrating, but it came to a point where, fuck this shit. Why should I have to handle this? You're not paying me no wages. Yeah. I left this shit 10 years behind, 20 years ago. I ain't doing it no more. So it was that. He said, it's going down your throat, pal. You touch that one more time. And so he scuttled off. And the guy who presented was that guy from, you see, I'm hopeless with names. So, you told me a Muslim name, I'd know it's Arabic name. But anyway, I'm only joking. But it was the guy who used to present the Old Grey Whistle test. So he was presenting.
Oh, Harris.
Yeah, Mr. Harris opens up, presents the songs. When he presents the songs, I'm a special guest on this. Paul's invited me. And we are both walking on stage. So he presents Paul and he doesn't mention me at all. So I walk on like Billy No Mates, kind of, you know, who's that? Has he come to set up Paul's guitar or something? You know, and so I thought, well, what can I do? So I walk over to my guitar on stage as he presents Paul on stage and so forth. Paul walks up to the microphone, and you will see this on YouTube, that when he gets introduced on stage, Paul walks up to the microphone and goes, and this is, he always mispronounces my name anyway. Aziz Ibrahim. This is Aziz Ibrahim on guitar, whatever it is he said. I'll never forget that day. I will never forget that respect, that heart that says, I consider everybody an equal. I have consideration for everyone. And this is what I'm talking about. I mean, it sounds like a rant, but my respect and my kind of admiration for him comes from that. Not about the music. It comes from that, about the human being, about how he has always been with me, and I'm sure he is with everybody else. I know this might sound like a big up, and it might be a payoff, but this is the honest to God truth, that I have been treated like this a lot in my life in music. And sometimes there is a stand-up guy or girl who will show themselves what they truly are. And he showed himself on that day. And you can see, I watch it on YouTube just for that one little moment, just to go, good on you, mate. You know, respect. I felt great in myself. Played those 2 songs, did my thing, and it was just fun. And again, you know, it points towards this relationship working with Paul, that I'm glad he maintained it as a friendship. And occasionally, you know, I might write something like I did 22 Dreams, I think, where I actually sat down and wanted to write something for him. And I wrote that By the Waters, which he did on later with Jules with the orchestra. That was really something. I didn't like the mix. And I told him, and he said, well, he really liked it. And it was kind of, well, yeah. You don't have to agree on everything, you know. This
was Sonic Kicks, actually. So this is tracks 4 and 5, and up until that point, I guess it's time back to the point that you just talked about, where you have these credits for playing. But this is a thing where you actually have a writing credit, which is a lovely thing.
Yeah, I mean, it was because I introduced him to my secret weapon, which was a baritone acoustic, and that's why I don't like the mix, because a baritone acoustic means it is like a bass in a way, a 6. string bass almost, but an acoustic one. And I made up these chords because that's what I do. I put it in an open tuning, a weird tuning, and I made up chords because there is no convention to it anymore once you change a tuning. And I wrote this progression of chords, and we were at Black Barn, and I said, Paul, I want to play you something. What do you think of these chords? And I played this progression, and he just picked up a piece of paper and started writing. It was as simple as that. And he came up with those lyrics for that, By the Waters. And
it's lovely. That whole kind of, come now beside the water, sit and rest. And it's a brilliant song.
Absolutely loved it. I mean, I even said to him about the track, I said, the first take you did, that was the best take. And then you got drunk. It was downhill from there. And then on top of that, when it was mixed, the guitar was never meant to be a normal acoustic. So it was mixed in a way, personally, I thought, in a way that it sounded like a normal acoustic. So all the bottom end was taken out and so forth. And it was supposed to sit in a certain way, bigger and bolder. So it sounded like, is it a guitar or is it something else? It had a lot of body. It didn't need support from a bass guitar. It didn't need support from anything. I mean, this is about production, really. But the orchestra was genius. I mean, I said to him, I can't remember what it was, both of us just talking about. Wouldn't it be great to have an orchestra and then have the arrangements kind of off center, really, left field? And Paul brought a friend in to do an arrangement. And that's how that tune ended up as it was. And it was great spending time in the studio because I was like going through all Paul's gear and all the equipment that was there. And he's got sitars and stuff and all his old memorabilia and things, and they're laying around. I mean, there are pictures and there are stuff online where you can actually see what the equipment's, that he owns, all the original stuff from old Hammond organs, you name it, he's got it. And but it was great to see up front and kind of understand how his tone, and I'm a guitarist, so obviously I'm going to look at that Marshall that he uses, that little combo he's always used, and the Epiphones and the Gibsons and the Fenders that he used, and it's like Aladdin's cave for a musician, it really is. Yeah. That song came about there in that way, and the other one followed as well in that way.
Yeah, Sleep of the Serene, which comes just before on the album, if you're listening to it, just before By the Waters, so track 4 and 5. That was you just jamming with this massive pedal board, wasn't it? About like 6 foot long or something.
That's right. Well, basically, it was like I made up these pedal boards just so that I could carry them down. It was like a Guinness Book of Records. How many pedals can we connect together? It was like one pedal board next to another pedal board next to another, all in a row. And there's a photograph of this somewhere. And it was just because I wanted to be able to, if I wanted to do something, it needed to be there on the floor. I probably only used one, like a tube screamer or something. But we had to connect them all together to be able to use them. So, there was a madness of that. And
yeah. It's this brilliant little interlude. It's a few minutes long, but it's you, Paul, and then Charles mashing it all up together again. And that chopping up, which on Sonic Kick's album seems to be something that Paul was experimenting with a lot more. And Andy Lewis talks about the fact that they were moving on to Pro Tools for the first time and away from analog. Everybody just kind of learning and experimenting together.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one thing people don't realize, or maybe some do, but a lot don't realize that he embraced digital technology. And the craziness and the madness came from the producer remixer. Well, I call them producers or sound creators of Ableton and Logic and Pro Tools and all this kind of thing, where they were able to manipulate sound. Because yes, you can go back to the Beatles days and start doing, what George Martin did or whatever. But this was the digital age, and there are tools that can, obviously you can cut things down and you can be more efficient in your work and the time factor and so forth. So that was there all the time. So a lot of what you hear on those albums is that kind of cutting and pasting of sound on a digital audio workstation. And I didn't even know that at the time. When in the studio, I saw it and I was like, wow, talk about mixing convention with innovation. But it was musical. It was still organic, because he was still controlling it in a way. He said, this is what I want. And that's what he was getting, He was still the producer, still the musician, still saying, this is how I want and this is what I envisage. It was great to see that. Like I said, his knowledge of music, innovation, all these things. I mean, I used to sit there. I remember we were at Nomis once. I think Nomis was one of the places we recorded. So he was recording at Nomis, and we were sat outside around the back of it. And I'd got this artist deal with a guitar company called Godin Guitars. They're made in Canada. Now, they're very innovative guitars. They have not only the electric guitar sound, they also have an acoustic sound, and they also have a synthesizer MIDI output. And there's not I wouldn't say it's a pretty shape, okay? And it does look a bit like a coffee table at the time, because Nomis doesn't exist now, so it was quite early days. But I'd show him this guitar, and he'd be like, what's that do? And what's this? And what's that? And I'll be like, well, this is the MIDI bit, and this is a such and such. So genuine interest. And then on top of that, I would sit there playing, noodling away. But what I play when I'm noodling isn't what another person plays. I don't play the blues. I don't play kind of the songs that I know. I play kind of Indian rags and scales and Korean stuff and Japanese stuff and things and techniques that I use to emulate instruments like that. And he picks up on this straight away, and how the fuck you do that? Show me how you did that. And how did you? That intrigue, that interest, you could see it, you could hear it. He was always on it, noticed anything that was off the norm. And I think that's what our relationship was about. It was because I wasn't your kind of conventional player. He likes things that he hasn't seen before, he hasn't experienced before. And that was also part of the relationship, that I brought something to the table, which was a little bit different performance-wise. But it's very difficult to do something different, on a guitar. Everyone always says, we've seen it before, heard it before. But, when you don't play in a 12-tone system like on a piano, black and white key, and you play in, some kind of Indian classical music, and there's notes in between. So, my vision and my hearing is based upon all those fractions, not just those straightforward black and white notes. And he picks up on those. I think, I know he did, because he used to go, I remember he used to tell Noel G about them, or he'd playing something. I used to show Paul some stuff, and he'd play it, and then he'd show it to Noel. And then Noel, when I met him, a couple of times, he'd be like, yeah, I know about you, fucking sick and tired of hearing about your this and that and the other. And that's how I know. That's how I know, because coming full circle through him, that I understand that Paul, is hungry as a musician, always evolving, always moving forward, picking up information and knowledge from whoever and whenever. And
everything being a source of inspiration in a way, by the sounds of things too.
Absolutely. Still young. You can see that in his playing. Young at heart. Young soul, punk attitude, always there. Not the haircut, not the clothes, not the age. It's purely the soul,
Now we have to talk 22 Dreams. We have to talk about God. We have to talk about. Am I right in thinking this is the first time that you've done vocals on any recordings?
It wasn't my idea.
This is a spoken word track on 22 Dreams, the album 2008, a double album, an amazing piece of work. But he recorded a version with Steve Cradock.
I'll tell you the story. I don't know, straight from the horse's mouth. Now, I went to the studio with a guitar on my back. I was down in London for whatever reason, and I thought, ring Paul up, see if he's free. I rang him up, and he says, I'm just in the studio, we're working. Why don't you come over? So I drove down, went to the studio with a guitar on my back, hoping to play a bit of guitar, little sneaky one, get a bit of guitar. So he presents me. I walk in, and he presents. Like I said, we always talk religion. So he presents me with this piece of paper with these lyrics on it, and says, "What do you think of that?" And I'm like, this guy is like a prolific and legendary songwriter, and he's asking me, what do I think of these lyrics? So, okay, I read it through, and I thought, okay, it's kind of my territory. And I said, I agree with what you're saying, and I agree that, your about your approach and your opinion. I think very valid, very honest. So in that respect, I said that's my two penneth if you want it. And he says, good. He says, now get in that room and go and read this out. So that's how that came about. So I went in this live room, got this sheet of paper. I've only just had a little glance through it. So I'm going to read this out now, and they're going to press record. Now, little did I know that there was already a chopper version of it, Steve Cradock's version on there. Now, so I read through it, and it's a one take kind of thing, and I read it, and it stumbles a bit. I listened to it, and I think, that's when I kind of lost the sentence I was reading, his handwriting and whatever. But it's recorded. And I come back in the control room and he sat there at the mixing desk with his hands on two faders. And one fader's got my voice on it and the other fader's got his voice on it. So he's going, Steve, Aziz, Steve, Aziz. You know, he's pulling these faders up and down. And then he turns around to me and says, yeah, God's definitely a mank. And I think what he meant by that was purely the fact that he wanted a certain kind of tone to it. And, you know, everyone knows the Brummie accent. It's not gangster, is it? It's not like, you can imagine like Dre or Jay-Z or whoever or Nas with the Brummie accent. No offense, but it's quite a friendly accent, isn't it? It's rolled up, you know, tones to it. And whereas a mank is quite kind of what you're looking at. He obviously, you know, he's got that harder tones, hasn't it? And I think that's what he was looking for the voice of God. God, I'm such blasphemy, man. Imagine me if my own Muslim community knew what I'd done. Blasphemy on this record, but thank God the two cultures don't meet.
Thank God nobody bought that record as well. It wasn't like it was a number one or anything.
I don't think anybody in the mosque bought that album, yeah. And so I was saved from that, yeah. Otherwise, there'd been a jihad on my ass.
So Sonic Kicks, he performed live from start to finish. I was there at the Roundhouse. They did every track in the order on the album. It was his brand new album. But your tracks were all played. Even Sleep of the Serene would have been played live. By the Waters has been played live. It was a real challenge for the band to play that live. But God, I don't think has ever been played live. So here's an opportunity for you, Aziz. Can you remember it?
Well, I mean, I didn't play the guitar. I think that might have been Chopper or Paul, but I think it was Steve Cradock did guitars on it. And there's vocals, which is probably his wife. Yeah, I've never played. I mean, I've never done that track. I mean, I was probably more interested in how I could recreate maybe By the Waters and do a version of that live. But yeah, it's complex. The orchestral part's the complex part. I mean, obviously, his vocal and his singing, you know, is just a vocal god. Whereas I'm just like this, you know, atonal mank when I come. But, I saw some shows, you know, I've travelled down to various shows. When he's been in Manchester, he's rang up and said, you know, are you coming over? You're coming over to watch us get drunk. You know, the hotel after. And there's been various times. And I've got to know the whole family, so to speak. The transition of band as well, you know, from the original band to the change and then the new members. And not just that, management-wise, and Kenny and his son, and John, his dad, and the whole entourage, you know, let me in. It's such an honour by every person connected to that, you know, the warmth, kindness that they've shown. Because I'm confident as a mank, but I'm not that confident in terms of, you know, culturally and so forth, of where I belong or where I sit. But music's my no passports required device through which, you know, create friendships and bonds with people. You know, we love music. That's more important than anything else. In all honesty, you know, this music that we're talking about and the friendships I've made with Paul and Chopper and Steve and the band and so on, it's about this journey about music, about what music really is about and what it does for you and how it can build. You know, even the world's kind of going crazy around you and the stuff you read and the propaganda and the madness of it, that the music is my no passports required device that friendships are built on. Music is created, and through that creation, there's love there's bonds and camaraderie and all manner of things. And that's me, you know, fully. If you want to sum me up, that's what I'm about, and not the dough. It's not the money. As Ian Brown says, and I love quoting him, Aziz, he should be living in a mansion with a guitar-shaped swimming pool. But he's not in it for the dough.
There's one thing, I mean, that leads me on to something I wanted to talk to you about, and there's the mentoring sessions that you do. It's fascinating. So there's the link with HMP Risley, there's the music therapy for Keach, there's mentoring young people in Hope Streets, which is this initiative in Lancashire. The playing isn't just a vehicle to make you famous and make you money like you talk about. You really care about this, and you care about giving back, I guess.
I'm a human being, just like anybody else. Why wouldn't I care? You know, if you're brought up, not dragged up, it's kind of, you know, the ethics and the values are there. I got this, I don't know about anybody else. I don't know if you have this same feeling, but when you have success, when you achieve, I also have this feeling of guilt, that I'm selfish, that I'm enjoying this. Why can't I share some of that? And And that's all it's about. I'm just trying to share what I have. And I don't have kids. So I think it's also the fact that I've got all this experience and knowledge that I want to share that and pass it on and do some good for others, so that when I pop my clogs, that you leave a mark in some way, or, that kind of, what's your purpose on this earth? What have you accomplished? What have you passed on to anyone? And it is biology in a sense that, cells pass on information, and hence, how things are preserved. People can all, in the East, you have pandits and ustads and gurus and senseis, and they pass on information word of mouth, whereas in the West, it's the written word. And it's that kind of thing that it's important for me to pass on, help, or whatever I can. Even like, Christmas times I used to spend down in London playing for the homeless shelters for crisis. I just like to validate time in a sense, that I don't want to be sat around stuffing my face and enjoying myself in that way when I could be doing something far more valuable for somebody. I mean, working in prisons was difficult, but to actually be able to, this thing I'm talking about the communication of music, that a person like me could sit there with somebody with very right-wing views in a prison. I'm not saying they all are, but with somebody specific, say, for instance, that normally on the street, there would be, a clash just because of the color of my skin or whatever. But to sit there because we have a love for the Jam, or we have a love for the Roses, or whatever it may be, common ground. I found that I had a use in prisons, because I don't believe in the system. I don't believe that the prisons are doing any good. I think they're just perpetuating things, and people are coming out and doing the same thing. And it's not always their fault. And I don't think the system's designed to help people, because it's political. I'm going in there trying to teach guitar and then doing mentorships. And at the same time, the government is closing down the facilities for the prisons because one person escaped or used a facility for his own purpose. But then because there's an uproar in the community and the politicians want to be seen to do something. So then they say, oh, well, we've removed all privileges from, prisons, and there's no, recreation this and not out. And it just doesn't work. That is not a way to help somebody. And yeah, you can write people off, but not all people in prisons are the same. Some people could be there because they're a stand-up person who stood up for their rights, but the law says you're in the wrong, and they ended up in prison. It could be somebody, they fiddled the tax, but it don't make them a murderer. It's just diverse. Ian Brown was in prison, It was the demise of the second album, or the first album's touring and what it could have been, and into the second album. And I learned that lesson because I made that mistake. I was generalizing, stereotyping, and they're human beings. And as anybody who knows works in social services and, does social work or caring or anything like this, that people need help. And you really need to get down to the issues involved here to tackle them, and not try and force things by saying, oh, you're a young kid, you shouldn't be out on the streets at this time, and blah, blah, blah. Oh, zero tolerance. That's bullshit. I mean, I'm just saying, this is me, my personality.
No, it's interesting, because I think I see the magic of the work Prison Radio does now, the Prison Radio Association as well. And it's the same kind of thing where you're getting prisoners to, experiment with production that we've just talked about, and things like, with radio and presenting and stuff, and the change that adding those kind of skills. It's all linked, isn't it?
Absolutely. I mean, communication. It's like being in a hospice like Keach, and it's a children's hospice as well. And it's kind of the first lesson that I learned is that you have to put yourself aside, because most things are about self-pity and about how it affects you and how sorry you feel, and you have to put that aside, because it's not about you. It's about the child. It's about how long they've got to live. And then the other side is that the parents will tell you, I mean, the child might have real problems communicating with people, and the music is the key for me, just to sit there. And it's not about how good you are. That's the one most valuable lesson that I learned. It's not about how good you are at all. It's just about, can you play together? As soon as you do that, you've got a link, you've got a communication going on, and you don't need to explain anything. And for that brief moment or those times, there's pleasure. There's pleasure in somebody's life, which is going to end. And, enough said. That's all there is. That's the goal. Can you give a brief moment of pleasure to somebody that they can keep with them? And we won't get into discussions of, do you believe in life after death and so forth. But for this gift of life, I just kind of think that music is so important. And the government right now sent out this message that arts are not important and the cuts that they're making are going to be in those sectors. And they have so got it wrong. I think if you talk to any social worker, you will find that families are falling apart, relationships are falling apart, businesses, all that aspects outside are falling apart, that the whole foundations are crumbling because the neglect of people's well-being, mental health especially, is so important. It's far more important to me, and I think to a lot of other people, than a lot of the businesses that they say, oh, we're supporting, we're pouring money into this, or the banking system, whatever it is. I think if your communities fall apart, if your families fall apart, what have you got left? What's the point in all these businesses and things like that, unless you haven't even got that happiness and families together and the foundations of a community, and a community that builds, links with other communities and the world as such. It's the old cliches, isn't it? It starts at charity, starts at home, and then with your friends and your family, friends and community. And I firmly believe that, just of what I've seen and what I know of how difficult it has been for social workers. And I see myself that music is like that. Music is almost social work, in that when you play and these bands are gigging and all these bands that you relate to through your life, I mean, don't you think that they're kind of doing social work in a way that they keep your mental health, your well-being up, the best time of your life? You were at uni or college and you met this girl who ended up with your wife, or you've got kids and blah, blah, blah that came, and that one song matters and the lyrics of it so resonate with you, and all the inspiration from people like Paul Weller and Steve Cradock and Steve White, whoever, Mick Talbot, lifetime stuff, isn't it? Stays with you for life. And I'm in this, sober as a judge, observing and kind of going, wow, I do believe in God. I'm kind of saying, Allahu Akbar, God is great because of what I see in the souls of human beings around me, the greatness of them. And I attribute to that, gifts that we're given. Why is it I can play the guitar like myself, like nobody else? And Steve plays guitar like he does, and Paul plays the way he does and sings in the way he does, and that voice that he's got, and Whitey's drum playing the way it is, and Mick Talbot's unbelievable command of, keyboards and his new band. It shines out of them for me. It's almost gospel in a way, but I believe in it from what I've seen, and seeing desperation of people as well. At the same time, that music is just so important and key to your heart and soul, integral to our lives. And this neglect of it and this cutting of the kind of budgets for the arts and things. And that's why I'm working in culture and arts sector, because I believe that, it needs to be supported, not just the rock and roll thing. How many times can you sling a TV out of a hotel room window, Probably more to life than that, And it's not the same with an LCD anyway.
It doesn't have the same impact, does it? Hey, look, this is so lovely. I've got a couple of questions before you go. Before I ask those two questions, though, I have to ask you about LA 2008. You bump into Paul. He asks, what are you doing tomorrow? Tell me more.
So, I mean, these are all uncanny kind of events. I know my voice has gone up a pitch, an octave, but...
You're excited to tell the story.
It's unbelievable that I'm in LA because I'm with a friend of mine, Alan, who's invited me over and say, hey, you've got a mate who lives out there. He's got a house and we can go and do some recording and hang out and I'll show you around LA and all that. And so I did, went out there and stayed at his house. And we're in Santa Monica on the beach. Obviously, a true man kind of running around, kind of, hey, check this out, check that out, all this kind of thing. And I run into Chopper, I run into Steve Cradock on the beach, looking like a lobster. And then I warned him, I told him to make sure he covered, use the right factor. But, and Steve says, he says, we're over at this hotel, and he says, Paul's over there. Come and look over and say hello. So I was like gobsmacked. So I was like, you guys are here at the same time. And then I went over to the hotel and Paul's there and he's like shocked. And what are you doing here? And then it was just like all mates together. And it's kind of, do you fancy getting up and guesting, on a song and playing something with us? And I was like, wow. I'm here in LA. I'm on the beach and I'm going to go and do a gig as well at the Wilton Theatre. It was very famous. Yeah,
wow.
So I said, yeah, absolutely. But I remember him saying to me, he says, but don't wear those shorts. I mean, how he's smart and I'm more kind of street fashions and I like all that kind of thing. And he says, but don't wear them shorts and make sure you got some shoes and all this kind of thing. The dress code for his band, which I'm like, mate, you want me to wear a skirt and high heels or I'll be in it. I don't care. It was going to be such a laugh. So, and not only that, he asked me, what am I doing here? And I said, well, I'm just rehearsing with my band here. We're not a band, actually. We're recording some songs and the friends. He says, well, do you want to do the support? And he says, with your band? And I was like, yeah. I mean, it was different because when I supported him on that heliocentric or the Illumination, it was myself, Andy Rourke, Mike Joyce, the band for my album Lahore To Longsight. That was different. It was professional. It was, the Smiths and the Roses combined on stage supporting Weller's band. But this wasn't. They didn't know any of the people, and it was just mates. And I ended up doing the support as well as being on stage with the Willing. I didn't have a guitar at the time, but I had PRS Guitars, an American company, had arranged a couple of guitars for me. So I've had an endorsement with them, and then they arranged these guitars. PRS guitars are not loved in the mod community because, that's more traditional. It's more conventional. Yeah. Rickenbacker, Gretsch, Gibson, Fender, Epiphone, these brands. It kind of goes hand in hand with scooters and stuff. So, and I turn up with this modern guitar is white and gold. It's like a pimp's idea of a guitar or something. And he's like, fucking gay headstock that, mate. He's looking at the head of the guitar. There's a fucking gay headstock there. But there's nothing wrong with that, as far as I'm concerned. But again, you see, it's about his acceptance of the way he kind of, I'm not like him. He knows that. And completely, a clash of cultures and so forth. But this music thing brings us together. But yeah, the Wilton Theatre that's how it came about. It was a chance meeting on a beach with Steve Cradock.
That's so funny.
I'm going over to him and him saying, do you fancy doing a song with me? Which I had no idea what it was, but I play by ear, so you can play me anything and I'll just play to it. I'll find the key and I'll jam along. That's how I play. That's how we roll.
That's amazing. God, what an incredible experience. I have to ask you as well, you mentioned Chopper quite a few times, which is, I'm guessing, probably a nickname given to him by Paul, because Paul does love giving people a nickname. We've heard on this podcast from the General, Jonesy, etc. You're known as the Bruce Lee of guitars. Did that come from Weller or somewhere else?
Bruce Lee. I think that might have come from maybe Ian Brown. I mean, most of these things come from either Paul Weller or Ian Brown. I mean, this White Stripes from Bombay came from Paul. Bruce Lee guitar, I think that came from Ian Brown. I just think differently about the guitar. I use what is, inbuilt in me, heritage, culture, all those things. If that was one thing I've learned from the greats of the British music scene, like Paul and like Ian Brown and the Roses and Jam and stuff, is about the honesty, about being you, about drawing on your heritage, about your background, where you come from, like Joy Division or whatever, it creates a uniqueness, and that uniqueness creates, a unique sound, and you develop your style and character and within your music in that way. If there's one lesson that I've learned in music, it's been that, and why I moved from probably you got to bear in mind, I came from like a prog rock background, playing from bands like Asia. I was coming out of Asia, Steve Howe's Yes thing into Asia, and, all that blue jewelry and shit. And I'm in this world where it's a very, I don't know. It's very quite elitist sometimes, and pure in a sense, and not very accepting as well sometimes, musically speaking. Hey, that's shit, this is great, that kind of thing. But I worked hard at it because I wanted to learn. I wanted to understand. I come from a different background. I want to learn how a kid from Woking works, how his mindset works, what his life is like. I want to know what a kid from somewhere else, Glasgow, or Easter House or something, how that is, and my background, and then kind of find inspiration from it, or find the truths behind it so that I can develop as an artist. I'm not a session player, I can do that, but I want to be just an artist in the way that sometimes other people have developed. So if anything, I could say that Paul helped me develop into refining my own individuality, my own uniqueness, having confidence in yourself, in your own being. It's not about your technical ability levels. It's just about reaching inside, as he's done. He never probably thought about it. He was just being him, having a good time with his mates. And as you can see by the band, the jam and on stage, the performances, as you can see with the Roses, performances on stage, mates, camaraderie, the best times. best times of their life. And chemistry for me personally, I got to say that chemistry in a band is what creates the best, outputs, I think. I mean, the strange, what we didn't talk about was how much he contributed to my album that was never released. Middle Road was the EP that I released on vinyl and CD before the album came out, which was Lahore To Longsight. I wanted my own band. I wanted to do something. I'd got the confidence to write songs. And I don't mean because the Roses were that bad or something. I mean, it was because they showed me that honesty, and all the values really work well when you're trying to express something across in songwriting. And God, I was rubbing shoulders with the Roses, with Paul Weller and the Smiths. And that was my encouragement. And between those three, it gave me the confidence to write my songs with me at the heart of them, as in their true stories and a reflection of my life. So I wanted to put an album together, and I put this album together, Lahore To Longsight, which has never been released. But this album has Paul Weller, Steve White, the Stone Roses, the Smiths, Denise from Primal Scream, God bless her soul, she passed away, Talvin Singh, Mercury Prize winner. It's an unbelievable album collection of people that you've never heard.
That's nuts. And it's kind of linked to your dad's journey from Pakistan to Manchester, is that right?
Yeah, it's about that whole thing of my existence. My existence wouldn't happen if a poor guy from a little village outside of Amritsar, where the Amritsar massacre happened, obviously partition that happened. So if he became Pakistani, and then from Pakistan, he got a job with the Reuters and the Press Association and came to Manchester. So that journey, I called it Lahore To Longsight, even though the journey was actually Amritsar to Lahore To Longsight. It's a story of a working class poor guy came to Manchester and spawned a family, and one of his sons became rock guitarist in the Stone Roses and Simply Red and Asia, and works with Weller and songwriter, blah, blah, blah. So it's a weird story, a weird journey. And I turned that into an album of my Longsight council estate experiences, and also the influence that he had on me. Because, I mean, I've written a symphony since then, a South Asian symphony for the Manchester Camerata Orchestra, a big orchestra in Manchester, who do the Hacienda Classical thing, that tour. So his story is it affects me so much. I created an album and a symphony and all manner just to tell that story. So this album came about, and it came about through the help of friends from these bands. And in meeting Mike Joyce, I met Andy Rourke, and then we formed a group finally. So the Smiths, the rhythm section, and myself. But prior to that, as I told you about meeting Paul and meeting Steve and being in the Players with Steve, why? Because Steve had approached me about working with him and Mick Talbot and Damon Minchella and creating Clear the Decks, an instrumental album, a bit like the Meters or something. That was the motivation. It was that kind of approach. So I'd invited Whitey and, to come and play on the album. On certain songs, because I wanted Mike Joyce to play drums on the other songs, and Rennie was playing on one song, and it was such a mad combination of people. But I was backing it through my own money and with friends who were acting as managers at the time, and we formed my own label called No Label Records. I got angry one day and was like cursing record labels and going, "Fuck them! I don't need no label. I'll start my own record. No Label Records." So it was a kind of mank rant going on. Formed this label, No Label Records, and then afterwards I created Indus Records, which is mine. It's like the Phoenix kind of thing about a birth of something after the demise of another, and the Indus River being the birth of civilization, so they say. So this album came together, and then Paul was like, so this is the part where I'm going to try and explain how Paul is on several tracks on this album, are playing guitar and vocals. And Middle Road is his main vocal part because he did the choruses, and I did a remix of it, 12-inch kind of version of it, and he took the lead vocal part, as in the repetition of the chorus. He did backing vocals on others. I did the lead vocal, and I couldn't believe that because I can't sing to save my life. I'm a sometimes singer. I'm a guitar geek, composer, sometimes singer. And there's this guy who's like the biggest, UK vocalist, incredible vocalist in that sense of, incredible music as such, and history and blah, blah, blah. He's doing backing vocals, and I'm like, it was making me feel very inferior. But I got the song across, so Middle Road came out. I think it was when we were playing the Apollo during Illumination Tour that he hopped on stage because he'd played, I can't remember, it was the other way around, but he just played the Hammond organ behind it. And I wanted that thing that we did on the outro section of a song called The Other Side, which was a street song. It was about my friends live on the other side, meaning the other street. They end up in prison or are dead. And I'm playing, because of music, I was saved from that and ended up where I am. And at the end, there's an outro that goes out on a mad instrumental jam, and he played Hammond organ on it. It just sounded fantastic. And well, it was a bit of a crafty move, so I'll be honest about it. Okay, I knew that he was recording Illumination, and so I thought, why don't I tag on a few days at Jacob Studios when all his gear is set up, Whitey's drums are all set up, all the mics are in place, and therefore save a bit of dough and catch off the back of Illumination and record high quality vocals, guitars, blah, blah, blah. And Manny was in London at the time, and he came and dropped some bass on this track, just about. He'd had a good night out, shall we say. I just remember we were sat there, me, Paul, Weller, Manny, and we were just like, Manny's playing the bass, and me and Paul like, come on, Manny, come on. And he was like, oh, I'm banjoed, mate. I can't. And Paul's like, nah, you've got it. Yeah, there you go. He dropped some bass on it too. So Manny played bass on Marassi, an instrumental track that came out on Melody Makers magazine, the 8 kind of cassette that used to be on the front. And then Paul dropped these keyboard parts and some guitars on other songs as well on the album. So I ended up with this album, Lahore To Longsight, with the greats on it. The greats from the Smiths, from the Roses, from the Jam and Style Council, and Denise, God rest her soul, from Primal Scream, who sang on Get Your Rocks Off and Don't Fight It, Feel It, and Screamadelica, basically, everyone knows her voice. And Talvin Singh gave me some tabla for 2 of the tracks. It was a right, and I never released it.
Why did you? I didn't realize it had never come out. Why did it never come out?
I still have it. I mean, you'll find it online in different bits and dribs and drabs because people load and they shouldn't, or just in general, there's snips here. And I will do. I'm going to put it up there. But when it came out, my record label fell apart. The finances fell apart, even though I was funding it as well. Complete carnage. So there was no finances to actually, because the EP had done well. It was selling at the Weller shows, basically. And because he played a big part on that EP, Middle Road. So then the obvious thing was to follow on with my album. And with all these superstars on it, I mean, I'm trying to keep focused. This is my album, and these songs are my Mancunian council estate songs. That's what it was about. But it was turning into this monster, super groupie, kind of whatever you want to call it. But hey, I take my hats off to him. He volunteered, a lot of his playing. I didn't even need to ask him, when we supported him on tour. He was watching, the band was watching. Obviously, they were watching Mike Joyce and Andy Rock, who wouldn't be watching the Smiths rhythm section supporting you at a gig. But I've got to tell you, Paul's not a big Smiths fan. I think that's where the North and South divide comes in. All right. Smiths, I think it's because it's miserable and he don't like that kind of thing and whatevs. They watched before the show and he was fascinated by these parts and things. I mean, obviously some parts probably not. We're still developing and substandard because I was only developing as a songwriter. But some parts were unique to me. They had my influences in the kind of Indian classical not Indian classical, but they had remnants of it. I just kind of steal from bits from here and there. And he got involved and supported it and asked me to do the support tours and played on the album. All these beautiful mellotron parts. And I mean, if you listen to this song called The Other Side, if you ever got an opportunity, you'll see what I mean. The middle 8 section, he's put mellotron flutes on it and then this mellotron strings and then goes out on an old Hammond, which he had, set up in, like I said, in the studio. But wow, for somebody like me at that time, I didn't have the money to do this. And yet I've got this quality, this unbelievable lineup, this contribution of these instruments and the, vintage nature of them and pure quality, And so I'm quite happy, even if the album was never released, I'm kind of happy to have something that other people don't have in their collection.
Yeah, you've got it. You can put it on. Yeah, nice.
And then you can search it, you can try and find it. And I get asked all the time, but the CDs, when they were manufactured by beggars, they came out wrong. So I had boxes and boxes of these things I couldn't sell, I couldn't release because the songs were in the wrong order.
Oh, no. Oh, man.
An issue, yeah. And then the band never went anywhere because 9/11 hit. And when 9/11 hit, our US tour was cancelled. I think we only got as far as doing like the Brat Awards and things like that and playing at the Astoria on a certain night. And it was going to go places, but then 9/11 hit, everything was cancelled. Anything with a Muslim name on it was definitely not getting a booking for US, and our US tour was cancelled. And then it just imploded. The band imploded. Mike and Andy went off to do something else, and I carried on doing what I was doing. But that's the album, and Paul played such a big part in it, and so did Steve White, and then the Players came about, that whole thing. And working with Mick was unbelievable, and Steve and Damon. But, the Style Council, I can't imagine what it must have been like, because every line he plays was a melody.
Yeah.
Every line he played was a melody. Unbelievable. And Whitey's drum playing is just second to none. Damon's bass playing is rock solid. Such a great line. And it's a shame that the Players for me personally, didn't go the way it should have gone from that first album, Clear the Decks, because that was the idea, the concept of, why don't we do instrumental music, grooves, and just go out and tour that? Not put a vocalist in, because it gave the band the room to flex their muscles. It gave Mick Talbot the room to flex his muscles, Whitey to do his thing, and me to play, grooves and guitar licks. I'm not Steve Cropper, but it was such a great concept. But it went off track. It went off on a tangent. Unfortunately for me, 2 albums were being recorded at the same time, the second Players album, and I was working, I think, on Golden Greats at the time for Ian Brown. They had a time agenda, and I was what was my priority, which was the Ian Brown albums, which I was writing songs for. And I was writing songs for that, but I was committed, But hey-oh.
Aziz, I've got 2 final questions for you. Thanks. This has been so lovely. I've had such a blast chatting to you.
Another 2, Danny.
Yeah.
Come on.
You're allowed 1 Paul Weller song for the rest of your life. It can be the Jam, the Style Council, or solo. What's it going to be?
It's got to be the Jam for a start. I'm kind of split, but that's entertainment for me is still just everything. Everything a song should be, everything a band should be, everything youth is lyrically. For me, that energy, youth, life, that's what that says to me.
Love it. Love it. Now, the purpose of this podcast is not only to talk to lovely people like yourself, but it's to get that meeting with Paul, to get that interview I never managed during my radio career. If it happens, when it happens, what should I ask him? And I'm hoping you'll have a good one, being the sober member of all these meetings whilst he's been pissed. So tell me something I should talk to him about.
Oh, God, I don't know. When did he stop drinking? Maybe the whys and the so forth about that. I'd love to know, how that came about. I've not actually sat there and talked about it because I just didn't feel it my business. But hey, I think you could get away with it,
It should be my business. Okay. Thank you so much for talking to me, Aziz. Thanks so much for your time, man. And very best of luck for the future, pal.
Pleasure, Danny. Thank you very much for having us. Oh, thanks for asking the right questions, mate. Cheers.